The definition of a dynamic character is a character that undergoes significant change over the course of the story. Neville Longbottom's character is the embodiment of this definition. He goes through a huge transformation, starting from a bumbling, nerdy young wizard who can't do anything right to a full-fledged hero. In this video, I'm going to go over that transformation as I explain the life of Neville Longbottom. Neville was born at the end of July to pureblood wizards Frank and Alice Longbottom, both of whom were Aurors, or Dark Wizard Catchers, and both of whom were in the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore's allegiance to fight Voldemort and his Death Eaters. According to the Quill of Acceptance and the Book of Admittance, the two things that record the first uses of magic in a child, Neville displayed his first bit of magic right after he was born, when he made his blanket shift. When Neville was born, he was part of a prophecy that had to do with himself, Lord Voldemort, and Harry Potter. Both Harry and Neville were eligible for the prophecy, because as the prophecy said, both of their parents defied Voldemort 3 times. This was easy as both sets of parents were in the Order of the Phoenix, which did nothing but fight and defy him. And also, both boys were born at the end of July. The prophecy ended up not being about Neville, however, as Voldemort chose to mark Harry as his equal, which set the prophecy in stone, but Neville came very close to having his destiny align with Voldemort's. When Voldemort went to mark Harry as his equal, Voldemort was defeated, and his followers were rounded up. 4 followers, however, Bellatrix, Rodolphus, and Sebastian Lestrange, along with Barty Crouch Jr., all evaded capture from the Ministry for some time. They eventually went after Frank and Alice Longbottom, hoping to get information out of them on the whereabouts of their fallen master. They tortured Alice and Frank severely with the Cruciatus Curse, or the Torture Curse. They did this for hours, and throughout those many hours, the couple was tortured into insanity, and were never the same again. They didn't know who they were, what was going on, and weren't even able to recognize their own son.
Frank and Alice Longbottom.
Neville's parents.
They suffered a fate worse than death, you ask me.
The 4 Death Eaters were eventually caught and sentenced to life in Azkaban, but that didn't make up for what they had done. The Longbottoms were deemed incapable to function in society, and were placed in the permanent ward in St. Mungo's Hospital, the hospital for wizards. Because of this, Neville was taken in by his grandparents. Shortly after he was taken in, Neville watched his grandfather die right in front of him, allowing Neville to be able to see Thestrals, creatures that can only be seen by people who have witnessed death. For most of his life, it was just him and his grandmother, and she was a stern and formidable woman. After raising her son Frank Longbottom, who was a very gifted wizard from a young age, raising Neville was very different, as he was not as talented as his father while growing up. He's a good boy, but he hasn't got his father's talent, I'm afraid to say. Neville was often told by his grandmother that he wasn't living up to his family name. She often got worried that Neville didn't possess any magical ability and might actually be a squib. She of course did not know about the blanket moving right after he was born, as no one actually saw that happen. His grandmother thinking and saying those things about Neville might have had a huge impact on why he had such low self-esteem as a young boy. When he got older, Neville was described as having a round face and was an accident-prone boy with the worst memory of anyone Harry had ever met. His grandmother never let him near a broomstick because she was worried her accident-prone grandson would get hurt. Because he was so forgetful, his grandmother sent him a remembrall.
When the smoke turns red, it means you've forgotten something.
The only problem is, I can't remember what I've forgotten.
Sometime in Neville's early life, he was sent a howler by his grandmother, a letter that screams at you, and he tried to ignore it, which made it scream even louder. Neville was very late at showing his magical powers, and his family sometimes tried to push him to force his magic to come out. Once his great uncle dropped him off Blackpool Pier, which failed, and Neville almost drowned. When Neville finally did show his magical abilities, he was 8. And his great uncle was holding him out the window by his feet. And when he got distracted by dessert, he let Neville go, and the fall should have killed him, but he was cushioned when he hit the ground and bounced. His grandmother was so happy that she cried, and his great uncle was so pleased that he bought Neville a toad that he named Trevor. Neville eventually got his Hogwarts letter, and his grandmother gave him his father's wand. When he and his grandmother arrived on platform 9 3/4, Neville lost his toad, Trevor. He met a girl named Hermione Granger who agreed to help him find him.
Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one.
He was in tears trying to find him, and while he was looking, he met Harry and Ron as well. When he and the other first years were taking the boats to Hogwarts Castle, Hagrid found Neville's toad. Oi, you there. Is this your toad?
Trevor!
When it was time for the sorting, Neville was intimidated by Gryffindor House's reputation of bravery and asked the hat if he could be put in Hufflepuff. But the hat still put him in Gryffindor, a choice that at the time might not have seemed like the right choice, but was definitely the right decision considering who Neville would become over his 7 years at Hogwarts. After he was sorted, Neville ran across the Great Hall with the hat still on his head and had to jog back, which caused a lot of people to laugh at him. Neville had a rough start at Hogwarts. In his first potions lesson, he melted Seamus's cauldron and was drenched in the potion that they were making. He moaned in pain as angry red boils sprang up all over his body. During his first flying lesson, he pushed off too early, fell off his broomstick, and broke his wrist. One day, Malfoy put the Leglockers curse on him, and he was humiliated as he hopped over to Hermione, who knew the counter curse, and was laughed at by the entire room.
You have got to start standing up to people, Neville.
Harry said to him, "You're worth 12 of Malfoy. The sorting hat put you in Gryffindor, didn't it?" At the next Quidditch match, Neville stood up to Malfoy and took on Crabbe and Goyle in a fight single-handed. He was knocked out cold. When Harry and Hermione went to give Hagrid's dragon to Charlie Weasley's friends, Neville got word that Malfoy was planning to get them caught and left the common room during restricted hours to try and save Harry and Hermione, but was caught by Professor McGonagall. It doesn't take a genius to work it out. You fed Draco Malfoy some cock and bull story about a dragon, trying to get him out of bed and into trouble. I've already caught him. I suppose you think it's funny that Longbottom here heard the story and believed it too? Harry caught Neville's eye and tried to tell him without words that this wasn't true, because Neville was looking stunned and hurt. Poor blundering Neville. Harry knew it must have cost him to try and find them in the dark to warn them. They were all given detention and got 150 points taken away from Gryffindor. After that, Neville didn't sleep for hours and sobbed into his pillow. For their detention, they went into the Forbidden Forest with Hagrid. Neville sent up sparks as a cry for help when Malfoy scared him as a joke, to the fury of Hagrid. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione went to sneak out again, Neville stood up to them.
You'll get Gryffindor into trouble again. I'll fight you.
Hermione then used a spell to get past him.
Petrificus Totalis.
This act is what gave Gryffindor the points that they needed to win the House Cup that year.
It takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to your enemies, but a great deal more to stand up to your friends. I award 10 points to Neville Longbottom.
During his second year, his bad luck continued. He was raised in the air and put on a chandelier by pixies.
Why is it always me?
In his third year, Snape continued to bully Neville in class when he told him that when he was finished making his shrinking potion, he would feed it to his toad Trevor. And so far, the potion had turned orange when it was supposed to turn green. Hermione whispered in his ear to help make it correctly, so that when Trevor took it, it shrank him as it was supposed to. Even outside his potions class, Snape still bullied Neville. When he said to Lupin not to entrust Neville with anything difficult, Lupin shot back at Snape and had Neville assist them with the first part of his lesson and said that he was sure that he would perform it admirably. Neville faced a creature that turned into its prey's biggest fear. For Neville, that was Professor Snape. Lupin then assisted him in beating that creature by putting his grandmother's clothes on him. Third year was the first year students were allowed to go to Hogsmeade, the town next to Hogwarts, and Neville's grandmother sent the permission form ahead of time. "Please, Professor, I think I've lost." "Your grandmother sent yours to me directly, Longbottom. She seemed to think it was safer." Neville had trouble remembering the passwords to get into Gryffindor's common room, so he wrote a list of the week's passwords on a piece of paper and ended up losing it. Sirius Black, who at the time was thought to be a murderer after Harry, ended up finding the list and getting into Gryffindor Tower.
You had the whole week's, in fact, on a little piece of paper.
Which abysmally foolish person wrote down the passwords and then proceeded to lose them? Is it always going to be you?
Professor McGonagall was so mad at him that she gave him detention, banned him from all future Hogsmeade trips, and forbid anyone to give him the password into the tower. He was forced to wait outside the common room every night until someone let him in. His grandmother also sent him a howler that he received during breakfast, and he tried to run for it while many people laughed at him. It ended up bursting out in the entrance hall. His grandmother's voice, magnified by 100 in volume, told him that he had brought shame upon the whole family. During holidays, Neville went with his grandmother to visit his parents in St. Mungo's. Every time he goes there, they do not recognize him, which we can infer must be very tough on Neville. During his fourth year, they learned about the 3 unforgivable curses. They thought that Mad-Eye Moody was the professor, when in fact it was actually Barty Crouch Jr. disguised as Moody. When he asked if anyone knew any of the curses, Neville raised his hand.
There's the Cruciatus Yes.
Your name's Longbottom. Neville nodded. Moody was looking very intently at Neville, this time with both eyes. Little did Neville know, he was looking into the eyes of one of the people responsible for sending his parents' minds into madness. He was staring into the eyes of a man who made his parents never be able to recognize him. He was staring into the eyes of a man who took what could have been a very happy life away from him. As he performed the Cruciatus curse on a spider, Neville's hands clenched upon the desk in front of him, his knuckles white, his eyes wide and horrified.
Stop it! Can't you see it's bothering him? Stop it!
Neville was not okay after the lesson. He was seen staring at a wall, while everyone saw the spider being tortured. All Neville could see was his parents writhing and thrashing, a sight that he never wanted to think about. Then the very man that was responsible for that vision tapped him on the shoulder and invited him to tea. He actually cheered Neville up when he told him that Professor Sprout thought he was very good at herbology, which gave Neville a sense of pride, something quite rare to see in Neville. He also gave him a bunch of herbology books that he thought he might enjoy. Neville asked Hermione to the Yule Ball, but she had to say no because she was already going with Victor Crumb. He instead ended up going with Ginny Weasley. The two had a great time, even though Neville kept stepping on Ginny's feet while they were dancing. The following summer, his great uncle gave him a plant for his birthday called a Mimbulus Mimbatonia. When he brought it on the train to Hogwarts, he showed Harry, Ginny, and a girl he had just met, Luna Lovegood. When he touched it with the end of his quill, it squirted out thick, smelly liquid everywhere. When Seamus confronted Harry about Voldemort returning, Neville defended Harry.
My gran says it's the Daily Prophet that's rubbish. She's cancelled our subscription.
We believe Harry. My gran's always said you know who would come back one day. She says if Dumbledore says he's back, he's back. When Malfoy made fun of St. Mungo's patients, whose brains were addled by magic, Neville tried to go after him to Malfoy's great shock, but Neville was held back by Harry and Ron, while his fists were flying, trying to strike a blow on Malfoy. When Dumbledore's army was started, a group that learned defense against the dark arts in secret, taught by Harry, Neville was one of the first to sign up. These DA lessons is where Neville really stood out, as he improved beyond all recognition. During that Christmas holiday, Neville went to St. Mungo's to visit his parents as he always did, but this time he ran into Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Ginny, who were there for Mr. Weasley. When his grandmother found out that he had not told his friends about his parents, she said, "Well, it's nothing to be ashamed of. You should be proud, Neville, proud. They didn't give their health and their sanity so their only son would be ashamed of them." Neville quickly said that he wasn't ashamed, before his grandmother told his friends what had happened to her son and daughter-in-law. Neville's mother, Alice, then came over. She was described as no longer having the warm, smiling face she once had, now having a thin and worn face, over-large eyes, and white, wispy, dead-looking hair. She made timid motions toward Neville, holding something outstretched in her hand. Neville reached out, and she placed an empty gum wrapper in it. Neville then said quietly, "Thanks, Mom." Neville then turned to his friends as if daring them to laugh. Harry thought to himself that he had never seen anything less funny in his life. Neville's grandmother told Neville to throw the wrapper out, as he had been given enough to paper his whole bedroom, but he disregarded what she said and put it in his pocket. Those wrappers were the only interactions that Neville ever had with his mother, and it was the closest he would ever come to connecting with her. The person who should have been able to hold him when he was upset, or tuck him in at night, or even just to make him laugh and be happy. Those wrappers were the closest thing he was ever going to get to that, and he cherished them like nothing else. Later that year, there was a mass breakout from Azkaban, and 3 of the Death Eaters that tortured his parents escaped. While this news upset Neville, it more so drove him to work harder in the DA meetings. The news of his parents' attackers escaping had wrought a strange and even slightly alarming change in him. He barely spoke during the meetings, but worked relentlessly on every new jinx and counter curse that Harry taught them, and he was working harder than anyone else. He was improving so fast, it was quite unnerving. Only Hermione was able to master the shield charm before him. Neville went to the Department of Mysteries with Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, and Luna to save Sirius after Harry saw a vision of him being tortured. When they got there, they found out it was a trap, and they were confronted by Death Eaters, including Bellatrix Lestrange.
Neville Longbottom, is it? How's Mum and Dad?
Better now they're about to be avenged.
Eventually a fight broke out, and Neville disarmed a Death Eater that was struggling with Harry, but accidentally disarmed Harry as well. Another one of the Death Eaters broke Neville's nose, and the wand that was once his father's. When Harry was one-on-one with another Death Eater, Neville came to his aid with Hermione's wand, and when he was unable to pronounce spells correctly due to his broken nose, he jabbed the Death Eater in the eye with Hermione's wand, forcing him to release Harry. When Harry refused to hand over the prophecy to Bellatrix, she tortured Neville. Let's see how long Longbottom lasts before he cracks like his parents. Unless Potter wants to give me the prophecy. even while being tortured and possibly under the threat of going insane the same way his parents did. He still told Harry not to hand the prophecy over. The Order of the Phoenix then arrived, and in the chaos, Neville dropped and smashed the prophecy that had to do with him, Harry, and Voldemort, although he never knew that it was about him. Eventually, the battle ended when Dumbledore arrived, and Neville and the others were taken back to school, where his nose was fixed by Madame Pomfrey. That summer, his grandmother purchased him a new wand. Neville thought his grandmother would be angry about what had happened due to all the publicity, but she was instead pleased and said that Neville was starting to live up to his dad at long last. When he returned to school, he was disappointed to hear that they were not continuing Dumbledore's army. When Neville was selecting courses and was going with his grandmother's wishes, Professor McGonagall said, "It's high time your grandmother learned to be proud of the grandson she's got, rather than the one she thinks she ought to have," particularly after what happened at the Ministry. Neville participated in the Battle of the Astronomy Tower, where Death Eaters entered the school. He, Ginny, and Ron stood guard outside the Room of Requirement, waiting for Malfoy, but he evaded them by using instant darkness powder. Neville tried to go after the Death Eaters, but one of them had blocked the stairs with a curse, which sent Neville flying backwards. He was in the hospital wing for a while, but was released in time to go to Dumbledore's funeral, where Luna helped him into a seat. While Harry, Ron, and Hermione went off to find Voldemort's Horcruxes, Neville along with Ginny and Luna returned to Hogwarts. They relaunched Dumbledore's army to fight Snape, the new headmaster, and the Carrow siblings, two new Death Eater professors.
They like punishment, the Carrows.
They wrote on the wall, "Dumbledore's army, still recruiting." Neville came into his own this year and stepped up when he was needed most. He protected other students.
Today's dark arts lessons had us practicing the Cruciatus Curse on first years. I refused.
It helps when people stand up to them. It gives everyone hope. I used to notice that when you did it, Harry. Neville, Luna, and Ginny tried to steal the Sword of Gryffindor from Snape's office, but were caught in the act and forced to go to detention in the Forbidden Forest, which might not have been as bad as the Punishers thought, as the three were very close with Hagrid, who took them. Neville was eventually on his own running Dumbledore's army, as Luna was captured by Death Eaters on the train ride home from Christmas holiday, and Ginny was forced to go into hiding with her family. When the Carrows put together that Neville was the ringleader, they sent Death Eaters after his grandmother to get him to stop rebelling. The Death Eaters, however, underestimated her, and sent only one person, who ended up in St. Mungo's, and was there for over a week. She then wrote to Neville and said that she was proud of him, and that he was finally his parents' son, and she told him to keep it up. After his grandmother got away, they no longer had leverage on Neville, and they were either going to kill him or send him to Azkaban, so he disappeared by staying in the Room of Requirement, evading the Carrows who were chasing him. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione arrived at Hogsmeade, Neville met them and took them to the castle through a tunnel made by the Room of Requirement. Neville sent the word out that Harry was back, and everyone started to come to Hogwarts. While preparing for the imminent battle, Neville, along with Professor Sprout, threw mandrakes over the wall to slow the Death Eaters down. When the battle unfolded, Neville brought venomous tentacula, and it engulfed several Death Eaters. During a ceasefire, he helped gather the injured and dead from the grounds. Before Harry went into the forest to give his life, he told Neville to kill Voldemort's snake in case something happened to Ron and Hermione. Harry then assured Neville that he wasn't giving himself up, and Neville grabbed his wrist and said, "We're all going to keep fighting, Harry. You know that." Voldemort brought Harry's supposed dead body back to the castle, and when he said that Harry tried to escape to save himself, Neville broke away from the crowd and charged at Voldemort, but he was knocked down, and Voldemort threw his wand away. "But you're a pureblood, aren't you, my brave boy? So what if I am? You show spirit and bravery, and you come of noble stock. You'll make a very valuable Death Eater. I'll join you when hell freezes over. Dumbledore's army!" "Very well, if that is your choice." As Voldemort raised his wand, Fawkes the Phoenix dropped the Sorting Hat in front of them. Voldemort forced the Sorting Hat on Neville's head, and Neville broke free of his body-bind curse, pulled the Sword of Gryffindor from the Sorting Hat, and cut the snake's head off. The fight then resumed, and Neville and Ron brought down the werewolf Greyback. Eventually the battle came to an end, and in the aftermath, Neville was sitting in the Great Hall with the sword next to him, surrounded by a knot of fervent admirers. Following the war, Neville worked as an Auror, just like his parents. Eventually, however, he decided to follow his true passion, which was herbology, and became the Hogwarts herbology professor under Headmistress McGonagall, a professor who always believed in him. He showed off his DA coin to his students, the coin that they used to send secret messages to one another back in his time of schooling. He and the other DA members kept them as badges of honor. He stayed close with all of his friends from school, and was close with their kids, who he taught when they came to Hogwarts. Neville was made the godfather of Harry's second son, Albus Potter. Neville stayed in contact with his classmate and former DA member, Hannah Abbott, and eventually the two got married. Neville's journey throughout the series is something very fascinating. The Sorting Hat always knew that inside the nerdy, clumsy, and forgetful boy was a brave hero waiting to shine. It was no mistake that he was put into Gryffindor, as he is one of the bravest and most inspirational characters in the entire series. Neville lived in his parents' shadow in the eyes of his grandmother, but he grew up to become someone that his grandmother could respect. His parents' tragic fate pushed Neville to be the best he could, and he became an incredible person that his parents would be very proud to call their son.